All right, everyone, welcome so much. Thank you for coming on, whether you're coming on Senior Safety Advice Podcast or the Aging in Place Directory Podcast or our corresponding YouTube channels. I am so happy to have you here today because I think today you're really going to learn something that you probably don't know. I'm always amazed at how many older adults, old caregivers, families, and even seniors are unaware of some of these issues that we're going to talk about today. Today, I am speaking with Michael Bonamarte. He is the managing partner at Levin and Perconti. It's in Chicago, right? Although you
Yes.
serve the surrounding areas. It's a nationally respected law firm that focuses on serious personal injury, medical malpractice, and nursing home abuse cases. So I'm sure he has a lot of stories to tell concerning all of that. But what makes Michael's work especially important for you is that many of his cases involve older adults who have been harmed either by neglect, by poor care, or honestly preventable medical mistakes, which obviously can happen. Through his work, he's developed deep insight into the realities that so many families, especially today, face when navigating this very complicated issue and systems of hospitals and rehab centers, and nursing homes, and everything else that's going on in senior care. And more importantly, what's not going on in senior care. So welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me.
Thank you very much for having me and the kind introductory words. I'm happy to be here and hopefully give some people a few pieces of advice, things that they can look out for, and the goal being you don't want to have to call somebody like me.
Well, yeah, the hope, right, the hope. But if they do need to, and then why would they need to? And how do they know that they would need to?
Yeah,
But
so
go ahead.
we can get into this, but I've spoken to a lot of different groups, community groups. Uh, One in particular, it stopped a little bit during the COVID pandemic, but it sort of was near and dear to my heart. I used to go to a public library and they had set aside a little area in the basement. And it wasn't a huge crowd, but 20, 30 people would come and I would talk to them about what to look for if they had a loved one in a nursing home or an assisted living, what kind of questions they should ask, what should their expectations should be regarding the appropriate level of care and treatment. And it was, I think they found it very useful. I found it sort of insightful myself because it's nice to get the perspective of people who actually have loved ones in a nursing home and the concern that they share it actually, or they share amongst each other, because so often they're pretty much exclusively for nursing home abuse neglect cases. Someone is calling our office and something really horrible and tragic has happened. Um, and that's what I mean. You know, the goal I think today would be to give you guys some advice. If you've got a mom, a dad, a grandma, grandpa in a nursing home or any type of elder care institutional setting, what you can do to be advocates for your loved ones.
Right. Doesn't necessarily have to be a nursing home. It could be an assisted living. And now I know there's so many individual kind of not group homes necessarily, but there's so many different kinds of communities that are popping up that, older adults, especially the baby boomers, are starting to move into and even create on their own simply because of the expenses of nursing homes. But any situation like that, I think it's very important for them to know. So what would you say the clues are to start thinking, all right, I need to pick up the phone and call someone?
A lot of it is your gut instinct, and a lot of it starts before, to the extent you have the luxury of trying to be involved in the placement of a loved one in a nursing home. You know, sometimes it happens where there's not a lot of options. There's A lot of times we'll see someone living independent or living with a family member at home and something happens. Maybe it's a fall, maybe it's cognitively, there's some deterioration in their condition. And they'll have a hospitalization, and then the hospital, things happen fast, and then the hospital say, well, we need to get some rehab. And the next thing you know, it's a long-term placement in a skilled nursing facility.
Right.
So, but to the extent you have some time and some ability to scope out or do some research on places in your area, I mean, it's funny and sad at the same time because I'll get asked this question from just friends, family member, people in the community. Well, which nursing home should I put my loved one in? And I'll say, I'm going to apply deductive reasoning in answering that question. I'll look at the nursing homes in the area and I'll look at my case management system and I'll tell you the ones that I don't have a lot of complaints on, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I know what's going on. But what I mean by gut instinct, to bring it back to what I said at the beginning, is, how does it look? How does it feel? How do the staff, how are they interacting with you? If you're visiting something, a possible placement for your loved one, what does it smell like? Things like that are real early cues where if you walk into the facility and it just looks wrong or it smells wrong, that's a bad sign. And you may
Right.
want to cut that visit a little bit short. But what's tough is that a lot of times, to maybe think of a clever way to put it, neglect whispers before it screams. So being in tune to subtle cues, changes in condition, when you're visiting, does your loved one seem lethargic, out of it? Are they soiled to the extent they're incontinent, things like that. But I think if the people on the call were to forget everything else I say today and perhaps remember this point that I'll make, it would help them and go a long way in arming them with the knowledge that they need to make sure things are happening and proceeding as they should. And there's a process or a model that should happen for every single resident that gets admitted to a nursing home. And we apply the same process when I'm looking, or we look at to see if the process was completed when we decide whether or not to take the case of somebody that's called us. And when I say it, it'll sound like common sense, real simple. But anytime someone is admitted to a nursing home, assisted living, you mentioned group homes, we do actually handle those types of cases that a lot of times are a younger population, the commonality being that it's a vulnerable patient population because of developmental disabilities, things like that. But in all of these types of institutional settings, what should happen is there should be an initial comprehensive, thorough, individualized assessment of the resident. There should be then a plan developed based on that assessment and with individualized interventions to mitigate risk factors that were identified in the initial assessment. Communication of that plan, because a lot of times it's not the direct care staff that's developing it. It's, somebody that's their sole job, like a care plan coordinator, an MDS coordinator, and I'll touch on that in a second. And then implementation of the plan by the CNAs, the nurses, other care providers, and then continuous reassessment, both regularly and if there's changes in condition, and then you repeat the process again. It sounds really basic,
Yeah.
but every single case that comes into my office that we select, there's been a breakdown in that process. And I've seen it at every single step. Sometimes there's a breakdown in more than one step of the process. Sometimes I'm looking at a care plan and the care plan looks really good, And then you talk to the CNAs and the nurses and they don't know what the care plan is. So it's that process is probably the most important thing that I think one of the most important things that you can consider if you have a loved one in a nursing home. And the nice thing about that is that you have a right to be involved in it. They're supposed to involve you in the care plan the coordination of a care plan. They're supposed to use you as a source to get uh, pertinent history about a particular patient, whether it's, and there's so many different things. I'll just give a couple examples, but whether it's related to appetite, because that becomes a factor as people get older, and in terms of food preferences, because it's so important to stay appropriately nourished and hydrated. And we've had those types of cases before. Whether it's somebody that they may be, quote, alert and oriented. In other words, they know their name, where they are, and what day it is, but they become forgetful or confused and they do things without asking for helps, and that makes them a fall risk. So all of those different things are things that you can participate in. When you start hearing things like or seeing things, uh, mom or dad looks like they lost a little weight. The facility called, they told me that mom or dad fell, but there's no injury, so it's okay. I'm not going to worry about it. That's a bad sign.
Right.
And there's so many times that our cases, it'll be like the third or fourth fall, and that care plan that I referenced earlier, no individualized interventions. It'll say things like, keep the room free of clutter. Well, I would hope you would do that for everybody, right?
Right.
Uh, no obstacles in the room. Tell the resident to use the call light. Well, those are some obvious things. Those are what I would call generic that they should be doing for every single resident. I'm talking about, hey, have you considered different types of alarms? Because this person becomes forgetful and confused or can't be relied on to use the call light all the time.
Right.
Uh, so there's all these types of things that you can look for. Lethargy, or if they look lethargic to you, are they being over medicated? Sometimes that's a sign of that. I've seen those types of situations where the staff, they'll give a PRN medication for behavioral issues like an antipsychotic, Ativan, things like that, and they end up just over medicating people.
Right.
And another thing to keep in mind is when you're there, if you're using the call light, how long does it take for the staff to come? Because, and there's exceptions to this, the large majority of the cases that we handle, the CNAs, the nurses, they're good people. They went into the business very well intentioned, but they are overworked, they're underpaid, there's not enough of them.
Right.
So you basically have a staff that's insufficient in training, number, and supervision because the corporation that's operating the facility is putting profits over people. And that's what happens. And that is what causes situations of systemic neglect. Now, I've had some really bad one-off cases where, a nurse was intentionally overdosing people with morphine. I've seen some rapes. I've seen all the bad things that you can imagine. But for purposes of this discussion, I think the audience, if you're as involved as possible and you're keeping some of these things in mind, it goes a long way to protecting the safety and well-being of your loved ones.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, you touched on every question that I kept coming up with, and it's true. I think having the communication with the family is so very important. Without the family having to hound the facility, every day or every other day, what's going on, what's happening, there should be some kind of communication. And you're right, as an occupational therapist, I worked in many nursing home facilities. I specialized in neurologically impaired, head injured, geriatrics head injury. So I saw a lot of that. You're absolutely right. They're underpaid, they're understaffed, and they're definitely overworked. You can't expect one person to manage 12 people all at the same time when they have such high needs. They really need one-on-one care. And yeah, the implementation of things like bed alarms and even rug alarms, anything this to indicate that the person is getting up or trying to get up, or even from the chair. Besides, as you say, the generic things. But that just shows a lack of, I don't know, uh, I thinking out of the box, or trying to personalize the care plan to that particular individual. I worked in some places where they did that beautifully, and then other places, as I'm sure you've seen, they can't. But I really think that the communication with the family is so important, as long as the family really is involved, because not all families are.
Right.
Some of them just drop them off and ciao. you
Yeah.
know.
No,
So,
that certainly is a factor. I mean, but you know, the process, I'm not just making it up. It's
right,
part of the federal regulations. Everybody in a nursing home that I've ever deposed or cross-examined at trial has admitted that's what the standard of care is. And you may be surprised, but I've talked to people in a deposition setting where they're giving testimony under oath and they're represented by the lawyer for the nursing home and they want to spill their guts to me. And they've said things to me like, Mike, I'm in a position where I have to make a choice. Am I going to go turn and reposition Mr. Smith, or am I going to feed Miss Jones? I mean, it's horrible, and I don't want to keep coming back to this, but it is a corporation that's behind these homes, and a lot of these corporations are not really have no business being in healthcare. There's private equity that's getting involved in the ownership of these homes, and they can be profitable. But how do you turn a profit? You increase the census, right?
right.
And you try to limit the resources. Well, what's the most expensive resource at a nursing home? Staff.
That's right.
There you
That's
go.
right.
And common sense would dictate that when you have that contradiction, exactly what you would expect would happen is going to happen. So,
Exactly. But healthcare in general in the US is a business. And the
yep.
purpose of a business is to make a profit. So
Hmm.
the patient, resident, client will never be the primary focus of that business. At least that's my experience, working in healthcare. My late husband worked in healthcare, and that's what we saw on a continuous basis. I don't know how that can change here. And I don't know, I don't know, because I know it seems now that more and more families are having to take on the burden of caring for the senior loved one. But that certainly doesn't mean that the senior loved one won't be neglected somehow.
Right.
I don't know how you handle that, or if you do, in any way.
Meaning
Uh,
like at home.
yeah, at home.
I
I
don't,
mean,
I
what
don't
happens there?
I don't see that as much. I'm trying to think. There may be some one-off cases that I've handled where there's been some like a home health agency involved, and
Right,
we've had to proceed with a lawsuit against them. Um, but I don't see that as much in terms of an individual. I might get some complaints from other family members, but it becomes a question of what can I really do versus is this more of a criminal type matter,
right.
a true elder abuse that might be subject to criminal prosecution. Um, but I'm on the board of a large national elder advocacy group called Consumer Voice.
Okay.
And they do a really unbelievable job lobbying for improvements in the care that elders receive at nursing homes and at assisted living facilities. And I was on a meeting actually yesterday, and they're putting a bill out there that would increase staffing. And they sort of don't believe it's actually going to go anywhere. But my point is that any bill that a group like they submit as potential legislation should include an alternative. And the alternative should be a pathway to justice for families against not just the entity, the corporate entity that's the licensee of the nursing home, but the real owners. Whether it's they've got real estate investment trusts that are the true owners behind this. They've got big groups of individuals. They've got private equity. Because sometimes, unfortunately, and it's not just in this area, throughout history, trial lawyers have had to regulate certain industries on behalf of consumers, tobacco, auto, opioids. It's the trial lawyers eventually having to get involved because, to answer your earlier question, how are things going to change? The fear or the threat that these entities that have hundreds of millions or billions of dollars will be actually held accountable, as opposed to playing some sort of corporate shell game that makes it difficult to go after them.
Yeah,
That's my opinion on it.
I like to say that at some point in time, the peasants will storm the castle
Right.
at some point in time. So you've handled medical malpractice cases as
Yes.
well. What are some of the most common medical mistakes that you see affecting older adults or that you have seen?
The medical stuff, I see affecting older adults, younger adults. I mean, my practice is I do a lot of birth injury litigation, which I don't want to digress too much, but the only reason I think it's relevant is that it's babies that haven't been born, developmentally disabled individuals, those living in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Again, the common unifying themes is they're all a vulnerable patient population.
Right,
I've represented elders in failure to diagnose cancer cases. That's a common one. It's not just limited to elders, but I have had a couple of cases involving failure to diagnose lung cancer for people in their late 60s, 70s, which I don't view as particularly old, but older adults.
right.
Those are probably some of the more common medical malpractice cases that I can think of, at least involving an elder population. I mean, all the issues in medical malpractice are usually more nuanced, whereas in a nursing home setting, what we're dealing with every single day are falls, fractures, brain injuries from falls,
Right,
pressure sores is a huge one, bed sores.
right,
Again, a very good example of the systemic problem of lack of staffing because of, it's not rocket science, but it takes manpower to go in and make sure that people are being turned and repositioned if they can't do it themselves. Medication misadministration. I've handled some cases where they've accidentally given the wrong dosage of certain medications, failure to monitor PT and INR levels for patients that are on blood thinners, resulting in different types of strokes. We've seen several of those situations. So, but again, coming back to what I said earlier, most of those situations are preventable when you are following the process, as opposed to just going through the motions and doing things generically.
right. Yeah. And, I see at some point we'll have robots coming in, turning the patients at certain points, or robotic beds, maybe. I don't know.
Well,
But
there are beds that sort of do some of the rotation, but it's not usually not quite enough, but
No,
they're air mattresses and there's some shifting of the weight, but it's not complete relief of pressure.
right. It's not complete. You need the actual hands-on. That's why I think the robots, yeah. Do you think in that old, not so old age group where they misdiagnose or not diagnose or incorrectly diagnose, do you think there's a level of ageism going on there? I know a lot of my friends, I'm in my late 60s, a lot of my friends are my age or older, and they swear up and down. And, I've experienced that also, where you go to the doctor, you explain something that's happening, and it's, oh, it's okay, you're fine, your levels are fine, don't worry about it. Meanwhile, I
You know,
could ask you a question.
I would say yes, other than the fact that I see the same, using that example, I see the same thing happening with younger patients that call us about medical malpractice. I think a common theme in just medical malpractice cases, regardless of age, is the lack of communication amongst providers. So, when you get somebody, maybe they go to the ER and then they get admitted to the hospital and then they need to see a certain type of specialist. And is there actually a conversation between the ER doctor and the hospitalist that admits the patient? And then does that doctor actually communicate with the specialists that they get involved? Are they relying? Another thing I've seen a lot lately is having uh, not doctors, like physicians assistant registered nurses, sort of being the gatekeeper at hospitals. I have a ongoing case where a client went to the emergency room 3 times and was never seen by a doctor, and the lower level provider, and I don't mean that in a
Right.
negative way, but they don't have the same level of training, experience, and diagnostic capabilities as a doctor does or should. Uh, those providers didn't put together a constellation of symptoms, and my client ended up uh, developing partial paralysis because they missed the diagnosis of a abscess on his spinal cord.
So you're talking about like PAs or NPs, yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, so you're seeing that, and I'm seeing a little bit more of that, and I frankly, I think it's a little bit scary, and I don't know if it's just a product of just not enough doctors working in the hospitals or what, but I've seen it now on a couple of different cases that I'm actively litigating.
Yeah, I haven't seen an actual doctor in years. Every time I go, it's always a PA or an NP. And well, and also there's so many doctors that are now, they don't work independently anymore. If they do, they have their own concierge medicine thing going on. Or if they are working for a large hospital organization, they've got 10, 15 minutes with you, they're in, they're out, they're not even looking at you because now they're on their computer,
Right,
asking you questions and just answering, and
right.
they have no idea who you are or what you are anymore. There's no more Dr. What was it, Dr. Kildare or doc, I can't remember now,
I
one of
can't,
those from a long time ago.
right.
um
You just reminded me a lot of times, some of the people who listen, if they have a loved one in a nursing home, they may know that their loved one had a primary care doctor for years. And if you can involve that individual
yes.
with your loved one's care while they're at the nursing home, that can be very helpful because sometimes they'll just assign some doctor who may go to the facility once a month. But if you have somebody that you actually have a relationship with and you want them to stay involved, I would strongly recommend that because they know the history, they know the patient, they'll be able to recognize changes with you, or at least it's somebody you can talk to and ask, can you go see? I'm concerned, she looks dirty, she seems out of it. I really need somebody to go. I've talked to the staff, they're being dismissive. I don't know if they're getting therapy, because you've probably heard this before, but sometimes you'll go in from a hospitalization. Maybe you have a little weakness just because you've been in the hospital and you're supposed to just have a little bit of rehab, maybe a couple weeks. But things cascade quickly when they don't act quickly. I mean, there's a saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yes.
Um, and it's so much easier to prevent a pressure sore from developing with the right type of pressure relief than it is to heal it if it gets really bad and really deep. I mean, I've seen cases where, it's taken years. I've seen people that have lived with it for years and it can never get it to heal.
Right.
Um, so those are, just a couple of things to consider. I'd strongly urge people to think about having a current doctor stay involved. Um,
I,
just
I,
because it's just so important. I mean, if you don't get the therapy, where I was going is that what's supposed to be a 2-week admission ends up being a long-term care uh, stay. Maybe there's a fall and a younger active person that breaks their hip or breaks a bone may recover in a couple of weeks, but an older person who already has other medical conditions to deal with,
right.
it can be just catastrophic. I've seen it all the time. You fall, you break your hip, they then are immobile, maybe they're at risk for blood clotting, maybe they're now more at risk for pressure sores, and everything just sort of cascades. I think it's actually something that's studied. It's called the geriatric cascade, and you see it a lot of times in
It
the
is.
types of cases that I handle.
It's true. I saw it many times as well as an OT. And you're absolutely right. If it's not taken care of, if it's not prevented at the beginning, that's why I'm so passionate about aging in place, universal design, all of that. It's the whole idea of preventing it. I mean, how many patients did I see with a head injury of some kind because of a ridiculous little trip over a rug or a cord or carrying too much or not properly using a walker or whatever? It didn't have to be. But prevention, you're right, is absolutely important. And the communication, I love that tip because you're correct. Having a long-term family physician or whatever kind of physician you've had for long-term, absolutely include them. And I think a lot of families get so wrapped up in the whole process, because I don't know if you've seen it, but in my case, it always seemed that it was something that, getting to the nursing home or whatever incident, it was because of something that happened right away. It wasn't something that was planned or thought of. It's not as if they researched nursing homes, when the
Right.
person was 70, 80, 90. It was, 2 days before they had to go to a nursing home or, whatever. It was reactive versus proactive.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's
obviously that's like making a decision when you're drunk. It's tough to make a decision at that point because it's emotional and there's financial and family drama and everything else that's going on.
yeah, I
So,
mean, there's also a lot of times people feel guilt about
yes,
it. So, you can't let that get in the way of being proactive. Because there are certainly a group of people that are well-intentioned, they love their loved ones, they are heartbroken because they have to go into a nursing home. And because of that, they feel guilty. And then because of that, they don't want to bother the staff, or they're worried that the staff will retaliate. But you just can't have that mindset. They're supposed to be there for a reason, nursing homes or
right,
assisted living, whatever it is.
right,
There are professionals.
right,
There's nurses, there's doctors that are affiliated with these things. There's federal licensure. They get money from the federal government to operate in accordance with a certain rules that are promulgated by the federal government. A lot of states have really good laws. I mean, in Illinois, we have a great law meant to protect residents, the Illinois Nursing Home Care Act, and it talks about resident rights. But you have to, sometimes it gets to the point where a loved one just needs care that is beyond the capacity or expertise of family.
Right.
And that is okay. So you
Right.
can't feel guilty about it. You just got to be proactive and do everything you can. And, I've had some families, by the way, sometimes it still can't be enough. I mean, I've had families where something has happened and they've come to me and they tell me the story and I'm like, you feel so bad because they're doing everything possible.
Yeah.
They're having shifts, so someone's at the facility almost 24 hours a day,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Uh,
I had a friend who she and her family were just finished doing that, almost a year of that constant cycle, and it is, you're right, because of guilt. Do you find that families are afraid of speaking up because maybe they think there's a cost, or they're going to be countersued, or I mean, do you find that that occurs at all?
no, yes, not frequently. I would say so that the one distinguishing factor is if they're calling us and the person is still there in the nursing home.
Okay.
Then I think there's a little bit of fear because, if they ask for the record, if I ask for the records, then they know, obviously,
Right.
for sure I'm involved or a lawyer's
Yeah.
involved. If they ask for the records, then they may be worried, well, now the nursing home's gonna think I'm being a pain or I'm possibly talking to a lawyer. Um, and I can understand that for sure. But I think most of the people that call me, uh, they it's not so much that they're afraid because usually the resident is either passed away or they're at a different facility. Unfortunately, that's just what happens because the injuries that they receive usually are too devastating for the person to overcome because of their other medical conditions. So I get more, I wasn't really sure I want to do this. I'm not the type of person that likes to sue. No one's the type of person that likes, I mean, there might be some exceptions, but most
Right.
people that I talk to have never talked to a lawyer like myself before. Um, and there are some times that people are concerned or they express concerns about the cost of hiring me, which there is no cost to hire me unless I win your case. Um, so it's always a free consultation, a free investigation, and we front all the costs of the litigation. Um, but the only time I sense the fear is if the person's still at the nursing home, I think.
And that makes sense. That's like stirring the pot while they're still there, and you have no idea how they're going to be acted upon. So once they do call you, what is the process? What usually happens, and how does it work?
So I have a big team of people that we've trained in-house. They're our employees, not, I, to handle the initial intake. They know the questions to ask. One of my partners has sort of a hybrid role and she'll consult with me and my other managing partner from time to time if if she's not sure what to do, but someone will listen to the family's complaints, uh, concerns, and then we'll make a decision whether we want to investigate. And that just involves, not just, I don't want to make it sound like it's just an easy process, but we'll send out a contract that'll allow us to act on the family's behalf. And we'll gather the medical records, usually starting with the nursing home and then any of the immediate subsequent hospitalizations. And when we look at the records, we're bringing it full circle. We're looking for exactly what I said earlier. Did they follow those steps in the process? Was there a breakdown on one of the steps? And can we show that that breakdown is more likely than not what caused the ultimate injury or death? In that particular case. But I have, you know, national experts that we work with, doctors and nurses that help us review these files, that act as expert witnesses for us, that, are true patient advocates and in their own practices. Obviously, when they're looking at a case, they look at it objectively, but they're experienced and they've worked in nursing homes and they know exactly what to look for. So we run things by them. And sometimes they'll tell us, look, there was some neglect here, but I don't know that it would have changed the outcome. And then sometimes we can't help those people. We can't help everybody, but even the people that we can't help, I think, appreciate getting some sort of closure, because maybe they called like something just didn't sit right. And we find through our investigation that I understand what they're saying, but legally, I don't know if we can help. Other times, and probably more often than not, when something doesn't sit right, there's probably a reason that that's the case. Any unexplained hospitalization might be worth an investigation, frankly.
I was going to ask you if you had healthcare professionals also looking at those cases, because obviously your expertise is legal, their expertise is medical. You mentioned that you working or you're part of Consumer Voice, the advocacy group. So do you see any systemic problems in elder care, from the information that you're getting through that group? Happening at the moment? I mean, obviously during COVID, there was a lot of issues that came up, for people confined in those types of institutions or facilities. What do you see now? Has any of that been resolved or looked at or?
Well, I mean, I think it, COVID revealed a long-standing problem in terms of the industry's ability to respond to a pandemic. Not that, again, I don't want to say that I understand things were changing pretty regularly in terms of what the recommendations were and things like that.
Yeah.
But what was universally known from the time the COVID pandemic started was that it really hasn't changed, was that an older population was going to be more vulnerable to the virus. And what I saw was more reaction and just kind of waiting to be told what to do instead of a lot of corporations being more proactive, being on the, sort of on the front lines in terms of, hey, we've got a population of patients, they don't have anywhere else to go. What can we do to make sure that they stay safe?
Yeah.
But the biggest issue in nursing homes that we've talked about, and that Consumer Voice, I think, and other elder advocacy groups is aware of and lobbying for change is staffing. It's
Yeah.
just the ratios are just not good enough. And there's, you can do like a forensic analysis to figure out, the amount of hours and all of that stuff, but I like to keep it a little bit more simple. Every nursing home should have the appropriate number of staff, not just in number, but also in training and in supervision to meet the needs or the acuity of the patients in the home, period.
Yeah.
Whether that means, somebody needs a little bit more hours than the other, they're supposed to do that. And by the way, if they can't, they should tell the family before they accept the person.
Yes. That should be written in black and white up front. But then again, not the families may not have much of a choice. They may have two nursing homes within a 10-mile radius of where they live,
Yep.
and they're stuck.
And in those situations, I think it comes back to, what we were talking about. Be as curious about what should be happening.
Mhm.
Be educated, ask questions, know the law, reach out, ombudsman, those are good resources. There's ombudsmen in every state that should be a resource. And if you just Google the ombudsman in your geographical area, they're a good place to at least ask some questions. But being there as much as you can
Right.
and being involved in the care planning conference, and that process is probably the two most important things I would say.
Do geriatric care managers help? Do they have information?
I haven't come across, unless they're known by like a different name. I don't know if I've come across those in my practice.
Yeah, there are not that many. I mean, that specialty is out there, but
Okay.
there are not that many. And it's, I mean, I'm not sure, honestly, not sure why. But on a personal question,
Sure.
I mean, obviously there's so many specialties of law. What brought you to personal injury and specifically for um, elderly and anyone who is incapacitated in some way?
I'll give you the brief version of my 23 or so year story here in the law.
Okay.
I went to college kind of with a predisposition that I was going to be a doctor.
Okay.
I took the MCATs.
Okay.
I think I probably did well enough to get into medical school, but I started to question whether I really wanted to do that. And, I wasn't necessarily afraid of the additional schooling and all that stuff, but I didn't want to commit to it if I wasn't fully invested. So I decided not to go to medical school, obviously. I took a year off. I started bartending, working odd jobs, and I said, maybe I'll just go to law school and can't hurt. So I'll get a law degree. And then I took the LSAT, got into law school. And then once I started to take my trial courses, I was doing pretty well in those. And I, just liked it. So my dad was an attorney in Lake County. He passed away pretty young. He was 50. But he used to send his cases to Steve Levin, who's our founding partner and my mentor, and really like a second dad to me. I actually went to high school with one of his boys, so I knew him a little bit, but not well. So when I was interested in the trial work in law school, my dad suggested that I reach out to Steve. So I called him and I said, "Hey, I'm interested in this stuff. Do you know anybody that needs a law clerk?" This was after my first year of law school, so going back to 2003 or so. And I started working here in my second year of law school, and that's it.
And that's
And
it.
then it just had the added benefit of doing trial work for uh, this type of patient population, this group of people. And, since then, over the last 20 or so years, it's obviously, we do not just nursing home neglect and abuse, but as I mentioned, birth injury cases, group home abuse, and then other types of
Right.
catastrophic injury cases,
Right.
and all of that stuff. And, it's kind of maybe an opportunity to do well by doing things that are really good and necessary. Uh, so, that's kind of my story.
I think it's a great story. I mean, you're using the skill, you identified a skill that you have being a trial lawyer, good at it, you like it. And then on top of that, you're using it, to
Yeah,
help protect a population that needs it.
yeah,
So yeah, I think you're building good karma there, Michael.
I think so. I mean, Steve Levin, I think he was the first to take these types of cases in Illinois and to discover the Illinois Nursing Home Care Act. Because our law is really, it's sort of a private attorney general statute. It's actually meant to encourage the families to bring litigation. There's a fee shifting provision. So if you go to trial, The defendant has to pay whatever the verdict is, plus attorney's fees, plus costs. And Steve was also one of the original 4 to 8 members of a big national trial lawyers group has a subgroup called the Nursing Home Litigation Group. He was one of the first members of that years ago, and I was actually the chair of that group actually it was during the pandemic. I had a tough year. It was in 2020 that I was the chair of that group.
It sounds great. It sounds like you have that passion that is needed, to make the job not a job,
Yeah.
And I think that's so important, especially as you get older. It's so important to really do. My friends ask me all the time, Esther, when are you going to retire? I said, I am retired. This is it. I'm enjoying every minute of it. So tell the
great.
audience how they can get in touch with you before I sign off here. And when I do sign off, stay on and I'll answer your initial question at the beginning. So how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. And is this something, if I put it into the chat, it would show up?
I'll put it up. Yeah, if you put it in the chat, then I will copy it and I will put it up in print.
I'm putting my email.
Your email.
And
I will
I'm
read that
gonna
actually.
put my direct line. And our primary location. You also can get to our website it's easier to remember, nursinghomelawcom.
That is easier to remember. I'm glad you shared that. That's very.
And seriously, you'll get to our blog which is a sub part of our website on issues relevant to what we're talking about today.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to put all of that in print on the interview. Michael, thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time to be with me. And everyone, I know you've learned a lot in this, and you have any questions, can help you. Obviously you can only work in Illinois, or do you work nationwide?
I've handled different types of cases in a lot of different states. Some nursing home cases outside Illinois, a lot of different birth injury cases in several states all over the country.
All right. So I will have
By the way, just through my connections, if it was for some reason you were in a different state and I couldn't help you, the chances are I'm going to know the right person for that type of case in that
somebody there.
jurisdiction.
So important. If you can't help, find somebody who can help. That way.
Right.
Yeah, that's so important. Very good. All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank
I
you.
will finish the conversation. Thanks. Thanks
Thank you
much,
so much for
everybody.
having me.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome. You're welcome.